Okay, so this is my first time doing this for the sort of picture-in-picture. So let's see how it goes. Basically what I've done here is I'm looking at what corresponds to slides 42 to 52 in your November 3rd package. In other words, I'm just talking about organizational feasibility because I want to keep this at 10 minutes. So we've already covered this first slide, the 5 major parts. So let me just keep going. The first one is management prowess. This basically means we want to have a team. As an investor investing in an entrepreneurial company, we tend to favor teams over sole individuals. The reason being that more people means more skills, more talents, more experiences, and also hopefully more money to get from those people, the management team, so to speak, to invest as well. The reason they do that, of course, is what's called the skin in the game. You want to have the management team who's coming to you, the investor, to also put some of their money into the company as well. So that way, if it goes south and goes bankrupt or whatever, they lose too. The reason you do this is because by having the management team put some of their own money in, they're less likely to be lazy, not work full-time at it, and so on. So in other words, commitment. So we want a team of really skilled people who are very committed and have their own money on the line. Complementary skills means, for instance, let's say if one person's very good at let's say, engineering, but can't talk to people. So it would be good to have another team member who, let's say, maybe isn't very good at engineering, but is very good at talking to people, so that basically the team members can sort of offset each other's weaknesses. Passion basically means that they have a drive, internal drive, to keep going even if things go south. Things are bad, things aren't working, but they're still going to keep pushing forward with it. Right? So they're energized. It's sort of an internal motivation is basically that point here. And the last one is management's understanding of the market. This just means, does the management team, the people on the team, actually have an understanding of what this market is? Do they have experience in this? The reason you, as an investor, you want to make sure the team knows what they're talking about is because if they don't, then they're going to have a higher probability of making mistakes, which is going to cost you, the investor, money. So you don't want lots of mistakes being made on your dime, so to speak. Resource efficiency. This again refers to non-financial resources. That's very important. The whole organizational feasibility studies are non-financial in nature. And we also talk about this idea of clustering. Clustering just means the location of your company. So if you're a high-tech company, you should hopefully locate near all the other high-tech companies so you can get access to the specialized suppliers and so on. The labor, for instance, might all tend to congregate in that area. Things like non-financial resources could be location. It could be, maybe a database full of information about customer buying patterns. It could be just a list of phone numbers, right? You just call these people who are buyers in this industry. It could just having social networks. You know somebody who knows someone else who happens to have lots of money and wants to buy that product. So it's the connections. So they're non-financial resources. Business models are basically consists of 4 subcomponents. Okay? How do we compete? How we use our resources, our relationships, how we sort of interact with the customer, ultimately to create value. That's the key thing. Is how do we create something that customers want to pay for? And hopefully it's not just one time, but they come back again and again and again. So it's the whole lifetime value of the customer, not just today's value, but a value over maybe 6 or 7 years. Okay? In this analysis, we talk about value chains. Okay? And I mentioned value chains as basically the step-by-step process within an industry. Right? This is going to be, like, for instance, if I'm manufacturing my pen here, it might start off with, well, oil in the ground, and then it has to be converted to plastics, and then it's converted into a pen, right? And then of course that pen has to get shipped because it's made in Japan, for instance, to Canada, put on a retail shelf and then sold to customers. There are two reasons why entrepreneurs worry about value chains. One is that oftentimes big businesses will outsource sort of support activities. In other words, they'll keep the main value chain sort of in-house, so to speak, and they'll let other companies, namely your entrepreneurial company, your startup, your small business, let them
do the sort of secondary work, right? So for instance, the factory might outsource accounting services or human resources services. What are some other examples here in my notes? Yes. So maybe some other things like your technology development people. You can outsource that. Well, that could be something that the entrepreneur could provide. So in other words, the support, they call them support activities. So that's something that maybe the entrepreneur could do for the main firm that's in this value chain, right? In other words, the primary activities stay with the company. The secondary support activities are the ones that outsource the entrepreneur. The second reason we worry about value chains is because sometimes entrepreneurs can cut stages out of the value chain. Meaning, we can, instead of having 10 steps, we can maybe make it 3 steps. Some examples of this would be getting rid of middlemen and using direct sales would be an example. Okay, so that's that. There are 4 parts of a business model. I want to quickly touch on each one. These are huge topics. You could do a business degree in some of these things, like strategy. But they are core strategy, these resources, which ultimately help us get a competitive advantage, what they call a sustainable competitive advantage, I believe. Yes, they do. Partnership networks, which just basically mean don't try to do everything all by yourself. Have other companies to help you out. And finally, how do you interact with your customers? So core strategy, again, mission statement, product market scope, and differentiation versus cost leadership. These are the 3 key main points of core strategy. Mission statement basically means, why does this company exist? What is our reason for being? Product market scope is just basically how broad or narrowly you define your company. So this is like, are you a car company or are you a transportation company? So how do you sort of define yourself? And then finally, of course, cost leadership is usually a strategy of keeping prices really low versus differentiation, which is making yourself different from your competitors. Normally, entrepreneurs tend to take more of a differentiated niche strategy, meaning you're different, you stand out as being unique, and you just focus on one little area in the market. You don't try to cover all the different parts. Right, so that's why market segmentation is so important. Strategic resources. Okay, basically strategic resources consist of core competencies and strategic assets. Right, the whole idea of having core competencies and strategic assets is to ultimately get some sort of competitive advantage. Not comparative, competitive. Comparative, we talked about that. Comparative advantage was an international trade topic. This is competitive advantage. So that's the difference. Competitive is how we as a firm compete to make ourselves better than everyone else. Core competencies are just things that you know how to do better. What's the definition of core competencies? Is basically a unique skill or capability that transcends products or markets, makes a significant contribution to the customer's perceived benefit, and is difficult to imitate. Okay, so it's something like Dell, for instance, knows how to get products out really fast. They call this like supply chain management. That. Strategic assets are tangible and intangible, are the 2 types. Right, tangible would be like you have location. You let's say have certain machines.